everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day, and today we are doing part 2 of our buy days on the paranormal. And well, if you watched last week's episode, thank you, because it was the most watched buy day in the history of buy days here at the Midtown Scholar. And if you haven't, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube page. It's the best way to get this content, as well as to watch interesting author talks. Like this coming week, we have Princeton sociologist Matthew Desmond coming to talk about poverty in and by America. But last week, I promised you parts of the Scholar you've never seen before, and we were now heading into our basement to discuss the television show Paranormal State, because it was their offices that had the ghostly book hoard. And I am joined by someone who watched that show religiously for multiple years, our cafe manager, Mr. David Kern. David.
Hi, everyone.
Tell us about Paranormal State, the TV show.
So Paranormal State was a wonderful TV show on A&E several years ago about the Paranormal Research Society of Penn State University.
Your t-shirt.
My t-shirt, yes. I love the show because it was with local people in a local setting, but it was also about helping people try to find out what was going on in their homes or in their businesses, what kind of entity may be there.
Yeah. Well, as you know, we got literally hundreds and hundreds of books, but we also had some ephemera items, some framed items. You grabbed a couple of those today.
Did.
What do you have here?
So the first one here was one of the episodes when they went to a sanitarium. They had found that several of the patients there had not been buried on the property. And so what they did at the very end of the show was they had a ceremony, and they also buried all the final remains on the property.
Wow. You can watch that on A&E. And
the second piece was what is a auditory drawing by a medium. Wow. So in one of the episodes, a medium is blindfolded, and then they, by sensing the entity, start to draw automatically onto a page. And this was from an episode that they did in Gettysburg.
Wow. Well, those were some of the things in the book pile. But as you know, here on Buy Day, we are primarily about books. So let's get right to our box.
I wanted to see what's in this box.
We have old books, we have new books, and I want to start with a book called Graveyard by Ed and Lorraine Warren. This book is inscribed by Ed and Lorraine Warren. David, who were they? So
Ed and Lorraine Warren were two demonologists as well as a medium. They were paranormal researchers, very well known. The movie series, the Conjuring series, the Annabelle series, and the Nun are all based on cases that they did. But one of their most famous cases was the Amityville Horror, which has been showcased in film for many, many years.
And as a book, you helped us recognize the value of this book, David, because it's inscribed by both of them, and apparently they didn't write their names in many books.
No, they did not. They only ever inscribed books or any kind of thing to people that they worked with personally.
Wow.
So, and they worked exclusively with the Paranormal Research Society of Penn State University, which is one of the members was Megan, and they actually signed this book.
Well, that's really neat. So Ed and Lorraine Warren will be in our signed books case at the Midtown Scholar. By the way, a book described in the blurb as not even Stephen King has written a book as terrifying as this one. We go from Ed and Lorraine Warren to a historical book now, David. This is a book by Hereward Carrington called The Physical Phenomena of Spiritualism, Amanda, and it is considered the first book by a psychic investigator. Carrington, here's an interesting picture of the table of contents, went and investigated case after case after case, and in the book he divides them into cases that he considers frauds and cases that he considers actually genuine. And incidentally, in honor of last week's discussion of spirit photography, one thing which he found to be easily manipulated and quite regularly a fraud was spirit photography. So Amanda, he reproduces an example of a completely fake spirit photograph in his section on frauds, and then talks about how it's done and why you shouldn't believe it. One more interesting thing about Carrington, not only does he found the American Psychic Institute, and is the first investigator, but he is also on the Marjorie Committee along with Houdini. Remember our episode on the psychic medium Marjorie? Well, he's the one who actually believes Marjorie and stands up to Houdini. That is Hereward Carrington, sort of the precursor to Ed and Lorraine Warren. Well, you're standing in front of what is something else we found called a psychic circle, David. And I have another great book, which is all about this. Can you imagine, Amanda, needing 2 volumes to describe the concept of table turning? Well, that's what we're talking about here, table turning. Come look at this table of contents. This is a 2-volume book written by a French count by the name of Gasperin, all about the practice of turning tables for table tipping, which was a key part of any seance. You had to hold hands, gather around the table, ask questions, and the table would reveal its answers. What's particularly interesting about this book is that he, like Carrington, the psychic investigator, believed that some things were fraudulent, but others could not be explained. It is only after deducing the fraud properly so-called and the gross errors that we encounter the true difficulty. There are still very numerous facts which are sincerely affirmed and which cannot but have a reality, wrote Gasperin all the way back, by the way, in 1856. So I promised you a discussion last week, if you were watching, of the Midtown Scholar Go Seth. So we are going to ask the board. Now, David, you please place your hand on the glass. We're going to ask the board, does Midtown Scholar have a ghost named Seth?
Oh, what?
What? Whoa! Whoa!
Oh,
and if you look at the board, oh well, the answer is yes.
Yes.
And actually, Seth has been spotted by many Midtown Scholar employees. Tell us about Seth.
Sure. Seth is a ghost that likes to hang out in our science room of our annex in the main store. He loves to push books off the shelf as well as de-alphabetize them.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's Seth. And table tipping, incidentally, a very interesting thing. One fraudulent way to table tip is to bump the table, but there is something called the ideometer effect, Amanda. Have you heard of that? It is a belief, and this is a modern psychological belief, that that you are susceptible, your muscles are susceptible unconsciously to suggestions. So there is an explanation for table tipping where you don't think you're moving, but you actually are, and there are subconscious stimulations which are causing this to happen. Gaspar, by the way, he believed in fluids. So he was much more along with the ectoplasmic concept that things were coming out and moving. But modern scientists do believe in the ideometer effect. Google it if you've never heard of it. It's pretty interesting. Also, Seth, technically, in ghost hunting circles, would not be a ghost. Seth would be a poltergeist. And the reason that Seth is called a poltergeist, well, let's first bring up the first book ever, Amanda, to discuss poltergeist in English. It's a book called The Night Side of Nature, Ghosts and Ghost Forms by Catherine Crowe. And this is the American edition of this. Catherine Crowe was a British novelist who we don't really know much about today, but she's the first person to discuss poltergeists and doppelgangers, both of which were German terms in English, and she wrote this book of ghost stories, and it was very influential. It influenced like Baudelaire and all sorts of interesting authors in the future. She talks about how really poltergeists are, in cases alluded to, the annoyances appear rather like the tricks of a mischievous imp. So it's more like a trickster, I think, Seth, pushing the books off than somebody who has not been able to find peace in the afterlife.
Absolutely.
So Seth would be a poltergeist. Interestingly, Charles Dickens, Amanda, said that this was like the greatest book ever. His exact quote was, Catherine Crowe can never be read without pleasure and can never write otherwise than sensibly or well. This is one of the most extraordinary collections of stories ever written, and we don't really know much about it. To make things even more interesting, the book sold thousands of copies after she was found naked and delusional wandering the streets of Edinburgh, Scotland. This made all the Victorian newspapers, and it helped this book become a runaway bestseller. First book to use poltergeist as a term. Well, we've had some amazing books, haven't we? It's been an incredible run, and we should end with a funny book. I realize that it is not intended to be funny. I find it funny. If you could just concentrate on the title, Amanda, I think you'll find it funny. One of the best title books ever, People Who Don't Know They're Dead. And this book, along with others, will be found in the Midtown Scholar Paranormal section. Thanks for watching Bye Day. Please watch us every Friday at noon for more adventures in the world of books.